Hey everybody, JR from JR's Cars here, and today we're working on the HHR, so stay tuned. Okay everybody, so today we're going to be working on the HHR. One of the things that I was starting to notice is that in the front end here, as you're driving around, you kind of hear like a little bit of a rattling underneath the car, and on the colder days you're starting to hear some squeaking. So I already took care of replacing the front rotors and the pads on this car. So as I took it apart and I was working on that, I kind of noticed that, especially on this driver side here, I was seeing like some flexing of the control arm bushing on the back. There's a couple, I'll show you what the control arm looks like, but there's a bushing in the back, there's a mounting point that mounts to the subframe, a bushing in the front, and then the ball joint that attaches to the steering knuckle there. Basically what I was seeing was, again, it was flexing in the back, and it was causing some rattling. Like you go over bumps, you hear rattling like that, and it's right in the floorboard. So if you're in the driver's seat, you'll feel it in the floorboards, and you'll also hear it down below right underneath your feet. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to take that lower control arm out, and we're going to replace it. Okay, so it's hot as hell out here. It's about 85 degrees, 70% humidity, so I'm doing this underneath one of the trees that I have in the yard. Normally I wouldn't have the cars this close to the tree, but it's casting a pretty good shade today, and it's going to help out with working on this thing so I'm not passing out from heat exhaustion. So first thing I want to say, and it's all my videos I have out there, you want to make sure that you're doing this safe. If you're working on your car, you have to be safe, right? So first thing you want to do, go inside the car and give a yank on that e-brake. Second thing you want to do, come outside, you get yourself, you have to make sure obviously you're on level ground. Get your jack underneath it, jack the car up. You want to get that jack stand underneath the car, and you want to make sure it's in a secured location. So what I like to do every time I work on a car, if I have one side up, I grab the tire and I put it underneath the, either if you're working on the front on the subframe, or in the back, just put it, wherever you can get it. That way, if anything happens, say that jack stand fails, the car is going to fall on that tire, and it's not going to fall on, if your leg's underneath it, obviously it may fall close to your leg, but it's not going to fall on top of your leg. A tire and a rim is replaceable, a leg is not. Okay, so here's what we're looking at getting after, right? So this here is your control arm, right? That's your control arm. This is where it connects to the body in the back here. There's two mounting points right up here. And then there's the ball joint that attaches to the knuckle. First thing you want to do is you want to hit these bolts, everything, with some good penetrating oil, which I have right here. This is what I use for pretty much everything that I do. You want to soak them down a little bit because it'll definitely make this easier to come out. Okay, so 2 points here. One, this control arm is for the HHR obviously, but this control arm and the process to remove this and the same control arm itself will also work on the Chevy Cobalt. So this is good for the HHR, and it's also good for the Chevy Cobalt too. Second point here is that those bolts back there are 15 millimeter. This one in here is a 15 millimeter. This one over here is a 16 millimeter. And this one here is a 21 millimeter. So you're gonna need a bunch of different sockets to get this thing off here. Okay, so that's out now. Basically, like I said, all you got to do is you just take that bolt, the nut off, and push that bolt through. Might have to get like a little screwdriver or something to tap it all the way through, because as you can see, it's got to push all the way out. That's what I ended up doing. So here's a little tip here to get to those bolts in the back on the control arm to the subframe. This is how I have to have the breaker bar set in there. So basically put this in with a 3-inch extension, and then you can get it between the inner tie rod and the sway arm, and you should be able to break that free. The other side is obviously easy because there's nothing in the way of it. Okay, so now that that bolt's out, you can take a little better look here. You can see that this is the control arm. This actually came out extremely easy. I'm actually very surprised. It doesn't really seem like there's much in the way of rust on this car at all. So everything's been coming off pretty easy. One thing you need to note with that is this is the bolt that comes out of it. There's a little keeper here. You have to make sure that this goes, when you're putting everything back in, that it goes back in like this. And then on the other side here, it'll obviously go in like this as well. Okay, now that I got both of those subframe bolts out there, this one is still in. So what I would do now at this point is, if you look around back here, you can see, I don't know if you can really see it that well, but on that knuckle, you're probably not going to see it. All right, that's a little better there. So if you could see right in here, there's that split. What I usually do is I'll take a flat blade screwdriver and I'll just shove it in there and just pry it open just a little bit, just to give yourself a little extra room there, so you can take this and move that ball joint out of the way. But I would definitely suggest doing that now and removing the ball joint before you take that other subframe bolt out. Okay, so before you remove this last bolt here, you want to make sure you leave that in there and then remove your lower ball joint, because if you take this one out, that whole control arm is just going to start flapping around when you're trying to remove the ball joint, and it's going to make it twice as hard to get it out. All right, so now that you got your ball joint out and you got that extra bolt out of the subframe, now it's time to get this bolt out here. Now again, I said this was a 21mm bolt, and this is also the through bolt for the subframe. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you put either a jack or a jack stand underneath the subframe. You're not looking to jack the car up or anything like that, just support it so it doesn't go anywhere. And then you're going to remove that bolt, and then the lower control arm is going to come out. So here's what the lower control arm looks like when it's out of the car, right? So these two were the bolts that go up into the subframe. This is the bushing end that goes through the subframe that we just removed that bolt. And then here's your ball joint. And then if you look, you can see what it looks like on the other side. Right? Obviously, L for left hand, driver's side. Which is going to lead me to a rant. Okay, so here's my problem. The whole reason I'm doing this video is because I was hearing some noise. I was hearing a lot of rattling. I was hearing squeaking underneath the car. It was underneath my, underneath my feet. It's my wife's car, but I was driving it around, listening to it, seeing what needed to be done. I mean, obviously it's a new car to me, so we're kind of still in that discovery phase. The whole thing is, when I took that lower control arm out, the bushing that was on the right side of the control arm that I just showed you, that bolt wasn't even tight. It wasn't remotely tight. It was to the point where I just put the ratchet on it, and I would have probably been able to take my fingers and loosen it up with my fingers. Now, I looked at the control arm, and the control arm itself looks like it's fairly new. It looks like it was replaced recently. I don't know, obviously, how recently it was, but it was replaced recently. And this just goes to show you that even if you take your car to a mechanic, now, I don't know this car's history. I don't know its past. I don't know if it was maintained at a dealership. I don't know if it was maintained at, say, one of the box auto stores, or it was maintained by the owner. You never know. There's torque specs for a reason. There's a reason, especially with suspension parts, especially with brake parts. These are important parts to your car to keep you safe. And as you saw in the beginning of this video, I tell everybody, you have to make sure that you do these things safely, because you're driving on the road. You're not only jeopardizing your life, you're jeopardizing everybody else's life in that car, and you're jeopardizing everybody else's life that's on the road next to you. So when you do shit like this, and you put in parts, and you half-ass put them back together, you're jeopardizing everybody else's life. So when you're doing things like this, if you're a mechanic, you should know this. And if this was maintained by a mechanic, shame on you, because those bolts should have been torqued down. There's no way that they would loosen up if they were not torqued down properly. So those things went together, and they went together half-assed. Just thrown together, whatever, who cares, just put it out the door. So I bought control arms to put in, but these control arms are almost brand new. So I'm going to put them back in, and I'm going to torque them down correctly and make sure that my wife is safe driving around in this car, and my family is safe driving around in this car. Okay, so with that rant out of the way, we'll get back to putting this back together. So the easiest way that I found to do this is to basically, if you look in here, you can see you have the upper part of the subframe right there, and you have the lower part of the subframe right here. That's where the control arm is going to slide through. What I did was I was able to get my pry bar in there and just open it up a little bit. You're going to kind of have to play around with it a little bit to get it in there. You can kind of see how it's sitting right now. So what you want to do is you're going to have to take it and slide it in, and then come over here. And what I did was on this side over here, I tapped it with the hammer to move it over, to shift it into that position over there. And then I put these two bolts back in, and I anchored them down into the subframe. Now that's going to anchor this part of the control arm and leave it into place. So then what I also did was I went underneath it and I put the ball joint back in. I haven't tightened it down yet, obviously. I haven't put the bolt back in, but I put it in place at least so it's there. And then what you can do is, if you look here, you can get your pry bar behind the control arm and just press up against the subframe, pull it forward a little bit, just so you can get this into place and you can get that bolt, that through bolt, back through. All right, so I had to play around with it a little bit more than I thought here. So what I ended up doing was I ended up moving this out a little bit. I loosened up these bolts a little bit here, just so I got like about another maybe inch of travel. I was able to get behind the control arm, pull it forward, things like that. Like get the bottom here to line up with the subframe. And what I did was once I got close to it, I took my screwdriver here, I got up underneath it, and then I was able to straighten the bushing out. And then you can kind of feel where it will go straight through into the body. You can kind of just move it around just so you can get it to line up. Get the bolt in there, and then tap the bolt into place. And then now we're good to tighten this all down, right? So this bolt here should be tightened down to 74 foot-pounds plus 180 degree turn. So when you hit that 74 foot-pounds, you turn it another 180 degrees. These bolts here, those are 41 foot-pounds, 4-1 to the subframe. This bolt here, that through bolt, which I haven't put in yet, that through bolt is 37 foot-pounds, and then you back it off about a half a turn, and then do it again to 37 foot-pounds plus 30 degrees. So get to 37 foot-pounds, and then turn it another 30 degrees. That's the correct way to do this, not the way that this was put together before. One other thing to point out is that when you're doing the torquing of the bolts, you have to make sure that the car is on the weight of the suspension. So being that it's jacked up in the air, your whole suspension is going to be drooped down. So what I usually end up doing is I take my jack, I put it up underneath the ball joint, which obviously is connected to the control arm, and jack up just to the point to where you hear the car lifting off the jack stand. I don't let it get off of the jack stand itself. I just hear when it starts, you can hear when it starts kind of releasing itself, the pressure from the jack stand itself. But you need to make sure that you're doing this so you're getting A, proper torque sequencing, but B, the bushings in there would be at the ride height position. All right, everyone. So I put the driver's side back together. I went and checked out the passenger side just to make sure that everything was good there, and everything was tight. It was, to spec. So kind of makes me believe that something happened on that driver's side. Maybe they hit a pothole and broke something, or they had a ball joint that went bad, and instead of replacing the ball joint, they replaced the whole control arm, and they just never tightened it down right. So I took it out for a ride. There's no more noises, no more creaking or anything like that. So everything looks to be in order. But it goes to show you, that you can only trust so many people. And like I said, I don't know if a mechanic did it, if it was the previous owner who did it, or if it was just, a shade tree. Who knows? So, so it looks like we're okay on this car, right? So if I hope it helped you out, gives you a little bit of insight what it's like to replace the control arm in HHR or in a Chevy Cobalt, because they both are the same. So do me a favor, give me a big like, put your comments down below, and consider subscribing to the channel, because I have something that you guys are all going to like. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to subscribe for it, because then you'll get the notifications. But I'll give you a little teaser. It's a 1973, and it's yellow. So stay tuned for that, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.